Our next session features a neuroscientist whose interest lies in understanding the biological basis of conscious experience, a topic that he considers to be one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century in terms of the science sector. And I'm delighted that the next subject of Being You, a new science of consciousness, conscientiousness as well, I suppose. I'm delighted to introduce to you Dirkx, the CEO and co-founder of Beenova AI, who's going to lead this conversation with Anil, Seth, the Professor of Cognitive and Computational Neuroscience at the University of Sussex. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Hello again, everybody. Nice to see you all. They've given me 2 challenging slots, both before lunch, so we're going to make this really exciting, and that'll be very easy with someone as compelling as Professor Anil Seth. So the question I want to start with today, Anil, is, can machines be conscious? However, we're not going to shake it up that much. Let's have a conversation a little bit first regarding some terminology, just so that we can all get on the same page in what is actually quite a deep conversation.
Sure. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. It's actually along with many, it's my first trip out of the UK since the pandemic started, and I love being back in Amsterdam. It's wonderful to be here. So yes, consciousness, artificial intelligence. I think the place to start really is so my fundamental interest over the last 20 years has been to understand, I think, questions that we all start with as a kid. Who am I? What happened before I was born? What happens after I die? And then, how is it that I am having any experience whatsoever? And so for me, this is what consciousness is. It's very simple. It's very hard to define precisely. But we all know what consciousness is. It's any kind of experience whatsoever. It's what goes away when you go under general anesthesia or fall into a dreamless sleep. And it's what comes back again when you come round in the morning, wake up from your anesthesia. That's all it is. It's not the same thing as intelligence. It's not the same thing as having language. It's not even the same thing as knowing who you are as a person. Like, I am Anil Seth, and I know that I'm this person that's existed over a number of years now. It's just any kind of experience whatsoever. And there is this big mystery, there always has been in science and philosophy. How can anything made of stuff, whether that stuff is neurons, wetware in the brain, or hardware in a computer, how can anything that happens in the physical world generate any kind of conscious experience whatsoever? That's been a big problem. That's what fundamentally interested in.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So when we start thinking about consciousness, obviously there are many different ways to interpret it, but for you, there is a very clear line. And I'm one of the lucky few that's already holding your book, but we have a special announcement towards the end of this talk regarding Anil's book. If you had to break it down in 2021, your main learnings that you would love to share with the audience today, and some of which I'm sure can be found back in the book that you've written as well, that I've started, haven't finished. What would you like to share? What do you feel are, for you, the biggest points that you've been able to summarize of late?
Let's unpack that a bit. I mean, there's quite a few things I would love to share, but I'm aware I can't just ramble on for about 3 hours and share the whole thing. But let me hit on 2 or 3 things. So the first thing is that there's the tendency, which in fact I just kind of encouraged in that little intro spiel, of treating consciousness as this single big mystery that to solve it, we might need some eureka moment of a solution, some vast realization. Perhaps we need to change the laws of physics or something, or some genius is going to come along and solve it all. I don't think that's the right way to go. I mean, there've been plenty of examples in the history of science where things that at one point seemed mysterious sort of lost their mystery as we just got on with the job of trying to explain their properties, like life. It wasn't that long ago that people thought life was not something that could be explained in terms of physics and chemistry, that there had to be this vital spirit, this élan vital, spark of life. And we don't think about that in that way at all anymore. We still don't understand everything about life, but the sense that there's this completely intractable mystery has gone away. And I think the same thing will happen with consciousness. At least that's the bet. We have to explain its different properties, focus on those almost separately. So for me, those are like, what happens when we lose it altogether under anesthesia, let's say? And then perhaps more importantly, in a way, how do we explain what we're experiencing right now? Like, you open your eyes right now, if your eyes aren't already open, and it seems as though the world is just pouring itself in through the transparent windows of your senses. There's this real world out there with colors and shapes and people and places and so on. And the way I've come to think about this is, indeed, there is a real world, but the way we experience that is not a direct reflection of what's actually there. It's always and everywhere this kind of active construction. I call it a controlled hallucination. So it's a neural fantasy that's tied to reality in ways that are not judged by their accuracy, because the brain doesn't care about accuracy, it cares about utility. So we perceive the world as it's useful. And then the final lesson, I think, or the thing that I really want to get, is that we have this intuition that the self, this experience of being you, which is the title of the book, is the thing that does the perceiving, like perched inside your head somewhere. But I've come to think it's a long tradition in philosophy, but neuroscience backs it up now. The self is not the thing that does the perceiving. The self is another perception. It's like the color red. The color red doesn't actually exist in the world. It takes a brain and a world for the color red to exist. Same goes for the self. You exist, but you're not what you think you are.
That's wonderful, and especially points 2 and 3. I can imagine when you're sharing that with people for the first time, it feels rather overwhelming to have that sense of, well, it is a controlled hallucination. And I watched your TED Talk. I do recommend it. Has 12 million views, I believe, in which you're explaining and sharing with the audience that that experience that we have, that we collectively agree on, and this did get laughs during your TED Talk, is a reality. That then becomes our reality. We have agreed that that becomes our reality. Can you elaborate a bit more on that, please?
Sure. I mean, one of the immediate consequences, if we think of perception as this internal act of construction, what we experience is this act of construction, then we're all going to have slightly different inner universes. We'll all experience the world in slightly different ways. And sometimes that becomes very apparent, like when people are actually hallucinating, for instance. They see and hear things that other people don't, and that's when we say, oh, they're hallucinating. You can think of hallucination in that sense as uncontrolled perception. Their predictions about the world are not reined in by reality. But in other cases, we tend to have a consensus, at least sometimes, about what's going on. Like, we can all agree we're in this room together, apart from the people who are watching this streaming. And the room has certain characteristics. It's beautiful, but it is quite boomy. But we're all probably experiencing in slightly different ways. But because they're similar enough that we can gloss over those differences using language, and we behave in ways that work in this environment, well, that's what we call reality. It's a kind of consensus. I mean, there is a real world out there, but the way we experience it and when we call it real, I think it requires this kind of consensus, which of course means that that consensus might not always exist.
Sure.
And we're used to this idea of like social media echo chambers, right? So people can believe things that you can't understand why they believe that, because they've been exposed to different media, different algorithms are funneling them towards different sources of information or disinformation. But the same thing might drive down literally to how we experience the world around us. We might inhabit perceptual echo chambers just as much as we inhabit social media and belief-level echo chambers. And I think that's got a relevance for wider society too, trying to understand why people differ, why they see things in ways that we just can't understand.
Well, I love that you bring that up, and there's two things that come to mind. I was having a conversation with someone the other day who was sharing with me that there are different groups of people that don't necessarily have the same words for a sensation like saudade in Portuguese. We want to say it's gezellig in Dutch, but it's not quite gezellig. So you don't have these explanations for sensations. Do they simply not exist? And I'm wondering as well what your ideas are around the fact that we've collectively gone through, and are still going, through a pandemic, all in our own very unique ways, yet also somewhat as a collective. And perhaps that's a way for us to agree on some kind of baseline reality. Maybe this is the positive person in me, the optimist in me, that hopes that that'll actually encourage people to see more of a variety of sides, or at least be willing to open themselves up to that. Is that something that you've considered, that when we go through something collectively, there is more room?
I think that might be. I think, firstly, the point about having words for things, for those things to exist as distinctive experiences, I think that's really important. And I remember hearing about another one. There's this word called pronoia, which is, I don't know if anybody knows about pronoia. It's the weird feeling that everybody out to help you, which of course doesn't, it's quite a rare feeling, but quite a pleasant one, the opposite of paranoia.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that, actually.
But the deeper point there is we never experience sort of sensory signals directly. Everything is an interpretation. And our brains generate models, predictive models about the causes of sensory signals. This gets us a little bit towards the sort of machine learning side of things. It's a good way to understand the brain as a prediction machine that instantiates a predictive model of what's out there, and the content of that model is what we experience. So as that model elaborates, the space of experiences refines and extends too. We all know what it's like to drink red wine, maybe for the first time. They all taste the same, but gradually we learn to differentiate because our brain has learned to predict the causes of different sensory signals when we drink different kinds of wine. But sorry, I've digressed. I mean, it happens.
That's why they only gave us 20 minutes. They were like, this conversation risks going on.
It has, I think like many, at the beginning of all this, a year and a half ago, there was, for me, a sense of optimism that there's something going on in the world that is just making its reality very clear. No matter what you believe about it, the pandemic is happening, and this is going to provide a stimulus for us to get out of our echo chambers and see the world more as it is, and learn to make longer-term decisions in ways that are good for society and the planet in general. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm not such an optimist, but I haven't quite seen that play out as could have been, and it is a shame, and right now it seems particularly weird because as we're in little baby steps emerging, but not all of the world at the same time, for me this is a time where instead of being aligned, the differences in how we experience the world are becoming very clear. I mean, we can see it even at meetings like this. There are some people who've already been to public events quite a lot now, and there are others who haven't done it at all. And I think we all then have quite different experiences of the reality that is in fact shared by all of us.
I tend to agree, for sure. There's a difference now in how we are able to respond and act within the constraints of the pandemic, or just the way that we've gone through this. But I do believe that hopefully there's a way for us to say, but at least we all can relate to the fact that we did. Whatever it is, some kind of rug was pulled underneath all of our feet. But regardless of that, I want to swing back to your earlier point around perception and color and words, and if we cannot name it, does it not exist? And it also reminds me a little bit of the dresses. I don't know if you remember that example. What is it, 6 years ago, a decade, who knows? COVID makes me feel like we've just passed through 15 years. So remember the blue and the black dress versus gold and white? Yes, show of hands, kind of. Do we remember that? Yeah.
Okay, how many, hold on, let's do this. How many saw it as blue and black? How many saw it as white and gold?
Still strange, right?
Yeah.
Still weird.
Yeah. And various neither, it seems. But,
yeah, because we have this idea that whatever we're experiencing really is that reality, and I love that you keep going back to this. We are at a summit on artificial intelligence, and the reason why I believe we were paired, I work a lot with conscious AI, and really looking at building machines that can actually work with the human on a more humane level. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Anil. Share with us a bit about...
I mean, so actually my background was originally in artificial intelligence. That's what my PhD was in. And in the lab at Sussex, we have a strong group trying to connect AI and machine learning to consciousness research. And there's massive opportunities here, but there are also, I think, dangers and pitfalls. I think the danger and the pitfall, deal with that first, is there seems to be like this unexamined desire to build an actually conscious machine. Like let's like accelerate AI and let's develop something that comes out of science fiction that actually has experiences. Like why? Because it would be cool, which is a terrible reason to do anything. And as soon as if we actually manage to do this, we don't know how, but if we did actually manage to do this, this would be an ethical catastrophe of an unprecedented scale, because we would be introducing the potential for suffering into the world, suffering we might not even be able to recognize, because it might not have the same form that we can recognize in other humans or other animals. So firstly, I think we should not be trying to build an actually conscious machine. Fortunately, we don't know how to do it, so it's maybe not the biggest worry anyway. It's certainly not just the end point of AI on its current trajectory. Intelligence is not the same thing as consciousness, back to our definition. So we like to group them together because we think as a species we're really smart. And we're also conscious, so maybe consciousness and intelligence are intrinsically coupled, so that when you generate something that maybe reaches the level of general AI, like human-level AI, it becomes conscious, the lights come on. I think this is human hubris of the sort of highest order. So we shouldn't try to do it. We don't know how to do it, but so what should we do? Well, here I think there are two very useful ways to couple these two research agendas. One you already mentioned is we need to design systems that interact more humanely with us, without giving us the impression that they are actually conscious and confusing us that way. That's a dystopian world of deep fakes and GPT-3 and all these things. The other reason is that we can use AI to really help us understand the brain better. Now, the brain is not a computer. I mean, one reason I think that people think you could build a conscious AI is this idea that it's just a matter of programming something the right way. A computer is a fairly useful metaphor for the brain, but it has limits. There's no sharp distinction in the brain between the mindware and the wetware, as there is in a computer between the hardware and the software. That's one thing. But we can certainly use advances in machine learning that we're doing in my lab and elsewhere to try to understand not the big mystery of how consciousness happens in the first place, but exactly how and why, for instance, we perceive the world the way we do. What kind of, if we take advances in computer vision, using generative models and so on, those can serve as hypotheses for how brains generate the conscious perceptions that we have.
For sure. I appreciate you sharing that, and just mindful of time, we've got about 2 minutes left, and maybe you are hungry, but maybe you're also excited to get your hands on one of Anil's books. Anil will be sharing them after this session. There are two things that come to mind. I think it's also that design, right? The models that we are designing, the intelligence behind it. We have a very limited definition even of intelligence alone. What are we doing to capture music, art, feeling, emotion, saudade, all the beautiful things that we simply cannot, we don't know yet how to do it. And I love the idea of balancing that space out with some of that energy, because else we risk losing really relevant stories that we've paid this price already before by repeating very limited stories about our world and allowing that to serve as our global holistic narrative, which is obviously one of the reasons why we struggle with exclusion today. I want to end on a kind of a funny note here. Anil, unless you have something very pressing.
Please.
We were speaking yesterday about octopuses and animals and their sensory and their perception. How octopuses have so many different places to sense their world from. I just would love for you to leave the audience with one of your favorite anecdotes about your work. I'm not putting you on the spot, you got 50 seconds.
Yeah, great. Well, let's stick with octopuses. I mean, so they are. There's this kind of rush about octopuses these days. People ignored them forever, and now they're everywhere.
That movie.
But they are amazing. I spent a week in an octopus lab in Napoli, in Italy, about 10 years ago. It was really one of the finest weeks I've ever spent. And the thing among many amazing things about octopuses, is that they have more neurons in their arms collectively than in their central brains. So this idea of what it might be like to be an octopus is this strange thing that it's not the way we experience our bodies as a sort of object in the world. They might have this kind of distributed nature of self. But with 3 seconds left, all I can say is I've never spent time with creatures that seemed both so alien and so present as the amazing
Alien
octopus.
and present. What a beautiful way to end our session today. Thank you. Thanks so much for your attention today, for your presence today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Of course, of course. Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you both so much. Just before you go, I've been asked to put this to you, and it's from somebody online. Jos, you can stay on with us.
Wonderful.
What do you think about other levels of consciousness, such as the autonomous nervous system that regulates breathing and heartbeat, even when we are asleep and not conscious? What is the auto in autonomous?
Oh, OK. The auto is the self, really, isn't it? So, you know, in the brain, we have these two parts to the nervous system. And one of them is this autonomic nervous system. This is the part that regulates and controls the body, rather than the part the peripheral nervous system that actually moves the body in the outside and perceives the world. The autonomic is about controlling the interior of the body, the heart rate, the gut, all this stuff. For me, this is really where the self starts. It's not this high-level concept of who I am as an individual over time. It's really rooted in the brain perceiving and regulating the deep interior of the body, which is why I think consciousness has a lot more to do with our nature as living machines, as being alive, than our sort of self-described intelligence.
And there is the essence of everything.
Well, I think it's just a different way to think about who we are as people. We tend to treat our bodies as just meat robots that get us from meeting to meeting.
Yeah.
And they aren't. They're fundamental to our experience of self. And it's not just the body on the outside. It's the mood, emotion. You were talking about the importance of feeling as part of intelligence. And I think that's massively overlooked in AI. And it's something that trying to understand the nature of all our conscious experiences leads us to appreciate the importance and value of.
Thank you. Thank you for that question online, by the way. And to our online community, we're going to break for lunch. But if you were here in Amsterdam, you might get a chance to get hold of the book, because you're going to give some copies away now, aren't you?
I am, yes.
In a stand in the catering area. So go and find Anil. And we've run out of time, but I know you'll be around if people want to come and chat to you directly. But to both of Jos as well, thank you so much. Jos and Anil, everybody, thank you.
Thank you.